So I'm here today with Clare Josa. It's great to have you with us.
Melita, thank you so much for inviting me.
You're very welcome. I am super excited to speak with you today because I remember being part of your imposter syndrome survey a few years back, and I've been getting all of your messages, and I just devour everything that you create. And I know you're a big content creator, so thank you for everything that you share with the world around that topic. But before we really jump into what is imposter syndrome and how can we manage that to help our businesses grow, I'd love to know a little bit about how you got your business started, because you used to be an engineer and now you're an imposter syndrome coach. So how did that all come together?
So my original incarnation, as it were, I've got a master's degree in mechanical engineering in German, and I actually spent 10 years in engineering, specializing in diesel engine manufacture. They're not as evil as people think they are. And I was one of the first people in Europe to be trained in something called Six Sigma, which is all about how to design a process so it can't go wrong. And I really loved that because I loved figuring out how things worked and understanding how to make them better so that the customers could really enjoy the experience. And then after a few years, I got involved in what we called some guerrilla market research. We'd launched a new engine in a car and we weren't getting great reviews from the German audience, and we didn't understand why. The market research team had done some research and it didn't make any sense to the engineers. So there were three of us spoke bilingual German. We dragged 100 engineers out to Stuttgart for a weekend, somehow managed to get 200 car owners into a hotel conference room, and we interviewed them. Tell us what it is that's the problem. Help us to understand. And by eyeballing the customers without any judgment or guilt from them, just tell us, help us understand, help us get our heads around this. What we realized is actually there was an issue with how the fuel injection system had been set up. When you get in a car that's got a really good engine and you put your foot down and you kind of that, whoa, as you push back against the seat, yeah? That drive feel, that bottom end torque is what that's called. And that's what we realized the issue was. And it was easily fixable through a slight change in the system. But had we not gone and actually connected with the customers, we would never have known. And it really got me excited about the power of being the translator between the customers, the engineering teams, and the marketing teams. So I left engineering to go traveling, mainly because of a bit of Me Too that had gone on, and I needed an excuse to jump ship. I went to South America and studied Spanish. And when I came back, I ended up as head of market research at Dyson, where I did exactly that. I was the translator between the marketing team, the engineers, and the customers. And I absolutely loved it. I was studying psychology. I became an NLP trainer. And then after a few years, I realized I couldn't make a big enough difference in somebody else's business. And I jumped ship. I set up my own leadership development company. I would not do it the way I did it again. I'm quite happy to share the mistakes that I've made, but that was 18 years ago now. And I now consider myself to be completely unemployable. The whole imposter syndrome specialism, that happened because the first ever executive mentoring client I took on really had their act together to the outside world, but at 3 o'clock in the morning, they were dying inside. And then the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. And I realized there was something happening to people who were already confident that was like the final frontier of personal development. And I realized that the cognitive tools I'd been trained in weren't working well enough. They were sticky plasters. And I made it my mission to get to what do we actually need to do to go below the surface, to clear the triggers for this behavior so that they don't need their coping strategies. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Wow, I love that. And yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Sometimes when you look backwards, it made perfect sense looking back. So, well, I had to go along this journey to get to where I am today. But then at the moment, it's like, oh my gosh, this is such a big risk or a big leap, or am I really doing this kind of thing? So I love that you did follow that process, and yet now you are making a huge difference in the world. So how does that feel?
It feels amazing. And what I love is the bit of me that's the inner engineer, the Six Sigma engineer. That's why I love designing programs and courses and writing books, because I know how to pick the bits of the process that make a difference and how to take out the fluff and the padding. And because I've got that inner engineer's BS meter, if I'm allowed to use that word on a podcast, it means that when I'm teaching stuff that's quite esoteric, because I'm also a qualified yoga and a meditation teacher, it goes through the inner engineer's filters to demystify it, to make it something that actually is totally accessible to people who don't spend their whole day sitting meditating on their 29th chakra. Yeah. So it means I get to blend the common sense, the practical applied psychology, that ancient wisdom that actually can create breakthroughs in minutes, and blend them all to create tools that didn't exist before, which is why my clients can get the results that they do.
Yeah, fantastic. And it's great that you've got this really well-rounded background with all these amazing tools that you can bring together in a whole new way. And I think that's a big part of what entrepreneurship is taking existing things and making something new out of that, something that really solves a problem in a new and different way that's really needed. And I think the imposter syndrome, I mean, I don't think I make it through a day without someone saying, oh, I've got imposter syndrome. So, it's a huge issue out there that's holding a lot of people back, and therefore a lot of businesses back, and preventing people from making the difference that they want to make. So it's just great that you've been able to make this blend and present that information in different ways that are really accessible, from books and talks to the bigger end program. So I love that you have that whole mix out there.
Thank you, Melissa. And it's really interesting, actually, because one of the things that can trigger us setting up our own business, maybe leaving the corporate world, is actually imposter syndrome. So a lot of the women I work with have got promoted to a certain level where they've realized the coping strategies aren't working. And one of the coping strategies they consider as a last resort is, should I set up on my own and run a consultancy? So this is often a trigger for somebody leaving, particularly after something like maternity leave, which is a really big red flag time for imposter syndrome. So the irony is they jumped ship because of imposter syndrome, and then they set up their own business. And unfortunately, they brought the imposter syndrome with them, which makes that a much more challenging and painful process, because we can have the best marketing strategies in the world and the best product or service idea. But if inside we are dreading every sale, that with each customer, they might find out, actually, we don't really belong, that is a fantastic way to sabotage the success that we're actually dreaming of. Not quite taking enough actions, yeah, not having the right tone or call to action in a piece of social media content, holding back on interviews, not speaking up with our true message, toning it down to be beige instead of a bit more Marmite, yeah, I would say that our tribe will really connect with us, and not niching. That's one of the biggest things I see for entrepreneurs for imposter syndrome, is wanting to be everything to everybody and then wondering why nobody wants to come and find us. And I am not in an ivory tower on this. Believe me, I have an entire drawer full of that t-shirt over the last 17 years. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that imposter syndrome is a trigger for people leaving, because I would have thought that it would have been the other way around, that the imposter syndrome would keep them there because who am I to go out and consult and say I'm this expert? But maybe that's me talking with hindsight.
Yeah, it's the reason it triggers them leaving is because they realize the coping strategies they built around surviving in that corporate role are no longer going to work. It's almost always a change of identity situation, like a return from maternity leave, like a return from furlough. We're about to see a rash of this, yeah? Or that tap on the shoulder for, right, time to step up to the next level of leadership. Something snaps saying, actually, I know I can't do that without dealing with how I feel inside, but how I feel inside doesn't have a name, and I'm the only one that feels this way, and I'm broken and unfixable. Therefore, I can't do it. So I will just leave.
Yeah. I love that you brought up there I'm the only one we were talking about earlier, that's part of the reason why I started this podcast, is because I heard so many people saying, oh, I struggle with this, but I'm the only one, or I can't do this, but I'm the only one, which is obviously not the case at all. Everyone has the same fears and doubts and struggles, but they may show up differently for different people and at different times, but it's something that's totally normal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah.
I was going to say, is that linked to imposter syndrome? Was that something completely different?
So this is particularly strong with imposter syndrome, because imposter syndrome is a very deep identity level issue. It's not about what we can and can't do. That's confidence and self-doubt. Imposter syndrome is about who I am. So if we think about the self-talk we use with imposter syndrome, it's not about I don't have the skills. It's about, what if they find out I am not good enough? What if they realize they made a mistake hiring me? What if they find out I am a fraud? All these identity level statements. And because it's existential, is if I let the world know that this is how I feel, I will cease to exist. It really feels that strong to people. So we feel a huge amount of shame because it's at that identity level. I am not good enough, and they might find that out. So we work really hard to hide it. And because we're working so hard to hide it, and everybody else is working so hard to hide it, and we're actually doing a pretty good job of pushing on through that stupid fear that we're hiding it, it leaves us thinking we really are the only one. And because we think we're the only one, it adds to the shame that makes us hide it even more. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I do a keynote or a masterclass on imposter syndrome, one of the moments I love is there is always a penny drop moment. I design it into the session, which is the point at which I want everybody in the audience to realize it's not just them. And the chat suddenly explodes. I thought it was just me. What, you mean everybody in the office knows what this feels like? Well, pretty much, yeah. Or if it's an entrepreneur group, it's, I'm not the only one that feels this way. Because we do think it's just us. Even though our research study showed women were 20 times more likely than men to talk about it and ask for help, we still don't do it very much. Yeah, and it's even worse for the guys because the research found they were 5 times more likely than the female respondents to turn to alcohol, drugs, and medication to handle the anxiety that pushing on through imposter syndrome caused.
Wow. And talking about your study, one thing that really stood out to me, and I was quite shocked by it, and maybe it's that difference. You said that we're 20% more, 20 times more likely to talk about it. Was that I always thought it was a female issue, that men don't have imposter syndrome. They're like born knowing, oh yeah, I can do this, and they apply. There's that study that shows that men will apply for a job if they can do like 20% of it or something, and women have to know they can do at least 90% before they'll even apply. So studies like that, I've always thought, well, men, it doesn't bother men at all. So I was really shocked when your report came out, and it's almost 50-50.
It's almost 50-50. So one of the reasons we think it's a girl thing is the original 1978 Clance and Eames research into the imposter phenomenon, as they called it, was very widely publicized, but it only included women. And people didn't understand that. So it set the scene for the myth that this is only about women. They did subsequent research that included men that showed actually men get it too, but that didn't get as much publicity. What we found in our 2019 research study is that the issue is that men and women handle it so differently. For men, this shame is even stronger. So the women, we tend to process those emotions, which makes us hold back from being visible. So in a business, in your own business context, that would be seeing a journo request on Twitter and suggesting somebody else for the interview when really it should be you. Yeah, that kind of thing. Is hiding, not charging the right prices, not having good boundaries with clients. What was happening with the male respondents, though, is they were pushing down all the emotions, the ones that the women were processing and helping to start clearing. And this pushing down of the emotions and pushing on through and not having male role models who were being authentic and vulnerable. And I don't mean washing your dirty laundry in public with vulnerability. I mean, there aren't many male business role models saying, I get imposter syndrome in board meetings, or I don't sleep the night before a client pitch. Yeah, they're just not there. Whereas the women are, because we're 20 times more likely to talk about it, the knock-on effect of that is huge. And we handle it so differently that it's easy to assume it doesn't affect men. But as soon as you start talking to men about it, they're really struggling with it too. This is causing them massive pain, but they're pushing it down and having to do that Superman thing, pretending everything is okay when actually inside it's not.
Yeah. I have a couple of male clients, and yeah, they have these imposter syndrome feelings, and but don't ever feel that they can talk about it to anyone else. So, and even with me, it's taken them like several weeks, sometimes several months before they open up and say, this is all great, but I don't think I can do this. I'm not the kind of person that can do this. It's like, well, and it's just, that's a great moment, because then you can really start to break that down and tackle it, and start to put like just those baby steps in place to help them prove to themselves that they can, and people do respond well to that. But yeah, so it's clear that imposter syndrome can really have a huge negative impact on your business and keep you feeling stuck for a very long time. And that's obviously not going to keep you in business for the long term. How can people, well, I guess I've got two big questions here, so we can break them up. Like, how do you know if you really have imposter syndrome, and if you have just that lack of confidence, or you're just making excuses? And how can you start to overcome that? How is there anything that we can do by ourselves to start moving forward and changing that self-belief?
So for the first question, the first thing is to look at what kind of self-talk you're using. Are you up there? I've got a model called the Imposter Syndrome Iceberg, and the identity stuff's right at the bottom. The behavior capability stuff is much nearer the top, sort of the limiting beliefs, that kind of thing. Are you talking about, I don't know as much as I should? Yeah, or I'm out of my depth. That is self-doubt. That's about your capabilities. That's where mindset work will help. That's where classic coaching will help. Anything that's kind of at that just below the surface level. Is your self-talk about I'm not good enough, I am a fraud, with the secret sauce for imposter syndrome of, and they might find me out. So this is the difference between low self-esteem and imposter syndrome. For example, low self-esteem is I'm not good enough, I'm rubbish. Yeah. Imposter syndrome is I'm not good enough, I'm rubbish, and I have the fear that I will be exposed as such. That is imposter syndrome. So the stuff that you can do for confidence also works for the self-esteem. That's things like having a great mentor who can help you see your great successes, having your wins files, all that kind of classic mindset type stuff we'd be doing. With imposter syndrome, we actually need to go below the surface. So the coping strategies can still work really well. It's giving yourself a pep talk, having someone you can phone and just say, I've just got to put a proposal together for such and such a company, and have that. But so that you can stop living in fear of that, there's a 5-stage process I take people through. So the first one is looking at your imposter syndrome myths, because they are going to keep you stuck. So the unconscious mind won't let you make a change it believes is impossible. So if you think imposter syndrome is incurable or inevitable or a sign of high potential, or, I read an article yesterday, your best friend, or something that you need to perform, you can imagine that the unconscious mind is going to stop you clearing it. So we start by getting somebody ready to believe they can do something about this, because potentially decades of shame and feeling that you were broken, that actually needs a bit of clearing out. Then the next stage I take people through, step 2, is taming your inner critic, learning how to choose which thoughts to feed, being able to press pause to break the cycle between the thoughts we think, the chemical reactions in the body that create our emotions, and the actions we take. So that you no longer have the inner drama queen, inner drama king kicking off as soon as that client email arrives going, but what if? You learn how to stop that, to clear the body's addiction to the adrenaline and the cortisol, which feeds the drama, which makes us hold back on the actions. Then the third stage, that's where we look at the hidden blocks, fears and excuses. Yeah, we clear out the limiting beliefs. That sounds very flippant, but it's actually quite easy when you know how. There's work that we do both cognitively and also in the body to clear the cellular level memory of the emotions that go with those fears, so they don't, like a dandelion, just reappear. And that's really the third level, but you have to know how to basically choose which thoughts to feed before you can do that chunk of work. Step 4, this is the really gorgeous, juicy stuff. This is so you can take off the secret masks and armor. So you do the work. What do I need to let go of to allow myself to close what I call the imposter syndrome gap? The gap between who we think we need to be and who we see ourselves as being in order to achieve something. When you clear out the baggage, the history, the fears, the blocks at that really deep identity level, then you allow yourself to become that version of you. There's no imposter syndrome gap. And then step 5 is consciously creating my future. What am I here to create? Who am I here to become? And when you do that as step 5 instead of step 1, you can imagine that what you actually dream and create is much bigger and has a much higher impact. And I know we talked about, resources that people can use for this. I've actually got a free gift, if that's okay, Melita, to help people with step 2. Okay. So step 2 is taming your inner critic, which sounds really hard. It's like, oh my goodness, but my thoughts, I don't even know they're there most of the time, and they just rattle around like a steam train. If you go to clarejosa.com/ABC, there's a free training for you to be able to press pause on your inner critic in under 60 seconds.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's a really useful one, to be able to stop imposter syndrome in its tracks. And it also has the added benefit if you play with it several times a day, you actually start to rewire the neural pathways in your brain to turn your inner critic into a genuine cheerleader. And this is part of the essence of those 5 steps for clearing out imposter syndrome once and for all.
Wow, sounds amazing, and such a complete process. I think that's, yeah, I would have, I don't know where I would have started.
It's taken
really,
17 years.
Yeah, exactly. But I can imagine it needs to be that process, as you said, for most people, it's taken several years for them to of belief to reach that stage. So undoing it it isn't an overnight process, unfortunately.
It's not, but actually, when I work with clients on my Stepping Up to Lead program, we do the whole thing from start to finish in 3 months part-time.
Yeah.
And they can feel massive breakthroughs by the end of week 2.
Wow.
So it's really quick if you're just ready. Yeah, my favorite Italian word is basta. So like pasta with a B. My kids know well.
Everything.
Yeah, it's like basta, enough. Yeah. You have to have a basta moment, as I call it. You have to actually sit there and say, I'm going to stop using imposter syndrome as an excuse to play small. I'm going to stop feeding my fears more than I'm feeding my dreams. I'm going to do something about this and take action. I might not know what that action is yet, but I'm having my basta moment. This is the last time I'm prepared to experience imposter syndrome the way I feel it today. What is the first step I need to take towards becoming the imposter syndrome free version of me?
I love that. I got goosebumps. Goose pimples. There's 2 different things. Yeah, I got goosebumps there when you were talking about starting to dream big and just having that perspective and really understanding what's possible for you and what could be. And I think that's just such an exciting concept.
Yeah. And when you do that from a place of having cleared out the blocks, you don't have to push on through the fear. Yeah. You'll still have comfort zones come up. I will still get a situation where I get invited to do something and part of me will sort of flinch, the flinch factor, I call it. And I'll go, oh, yeah. But instead of the old fashioned kind of imposter syndrome comes up and I self-sabotage or turn it down or turn into a nightmare with my family, I realize it just means that a gap's opened up. Is I don't yet see myself as being that kind of person. Great. What do I need to do or let go of to allow myself to become that version of me? Okay, that took 5 minutes. Great. Let's do it then. Yeah, the drama goes.
Yeah.
And we realize that the stuff we were scared of actually isn't necessarily real. Yeah, I talk about legitimate fear versus mind story fear. Legitimate fear was me taking up parachuting when I was at university to try and cure my fear of heights. And spoiler alert, it doesn't work. Yeah, getting in a Cessna with no door on it on a Saturday morning with a glorified tablecloth on my back, hoping that I would make it to Saturday evening at the pub. That's legitimate fear. Mind story fear is the what ifing. But what if I do this? What if I do that? What if they say the other? The problem is the body feels every thought you think, and it can't tell the difference between those 2 types of fear. So when we're telling ourselves those imposter syndrome stories, the body's reacting as though we were getting into that Cessna with the tablecloth and saying, really bad idea, we're just not going there. And it holds us back to keep us safe because it doesn't realize the fear was just in our imagination.
Yeah, and that mindset can just be so strong sometimes, can't it? And I see it with my kids sometimes too. We just run all these full scenarios, like, hang on a minute, come back. Is any of this real or even likely? No, right, okay, well that stops there then.
Exactly, and this is why so early in the process I teach people how to choose which thoughts to feed. Because when we can press near instant pause on those stories, they no longer have control over what we allow ourselves to achieve and create.
Yeah, fantastic. I want to come back to something you said right at the very beginning, and when you're telling us about your business story and how you got to where you are today, and you said, if I was to do it again, I wouldn't do it this way. I can't let you go without spilling the beans here.
Absolutely. So I was 30 when I left the corporate world to set up my own business. So I've just given my age away for those of you who can do maths. And I was very passionate, world changer, like I still am. And I wanted to do my NLP trainers training. And my company wouldn't give me a month off sabbatical to do it. And I didn't have enough holiday and they wouldn't have let me take it anyway. And, that was fair enough. So I thought, fine, I'll quit. as you do, I'm going to do this training because I can really see that I need that for the next stage of my journey, because there's an enormous leap between, say, being a master practitioner at NLP and actually being able to train a master practitioner. It's kind of a bit like boot camp for the body, mind, and soul. So I left, decided to set up my own business. I was already doing some part-time coaching, but I'll never forget the first day of sitting in my conservatory, as it was then, that was my office, going, now what do I do? Yeah, I sort of had a business plan. I didn't know much about marketing, despite having been head of market research. Marketing, the sort of stuff I was going to be doing, was very different to selling what I was used to selling. And I was on such a high for, okay, I'm going to do this. I've made the decision. If I had had a great mentor back then, I would have made sure I ramped down the job and ramped up the business.
Yeah.
So that by the time I sat there the first time on my own at 9 o'clock that Monday morning going, there's nobody else in the office, I would have already had a very clear work plan and structure, and I would have had contracts in place. And I had a few, but it made it a much slower start. And I wish I'd invested more in good mentoring, because also the other thing I was doing was that classic thing we do, is I hadn't narrowed my niche. I thought that the work I was doing was a niche enough, and it wasn't. If I had gone with that laser focus after one person with one problem, and I don't mean literally one person, but one type of person with one type of problem, I could very quickly have become well known in that field, and the business would have grown more quickly. So it felt like a very slow start journey. It felt very lonely. I went to a lot of networking stuff where everybody was throwing their business cards around as frisbees, wondering why they weren't getting any work. Had I had a good mentor back then, somebody who'd actually done it themselves, then I think that would have taken 3 or 4 years off my journey. Yeah. The other thing I've learned over the years, I've worked with many mentors, some brilliant, some that I'm like, okay, that was a learning curve, is I always need to do what's true to me. Yeah, I've worked a number of times with mentors who've wanted to change me and my business into what they thought it should be, and it's always crashed and burned. And with hindsight, I knew at the time it wasn't in alignment with who I am and my dharma, my soul purpose, what I'm here to create and express. But I trusted and deferred to their advice rather than following my intuition. So that's the other piece of advice I definitely give to the younger me, is take advice from others, but you really have to try it on for size. And if it doesn't feel right in your heart and your soul, it's probably not the right advice for you.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the pieces of advice that we hear most often on this show is get a coach or mentor early, trust your instincts, and really build that business that's right for you. And you have to find a coach that can do that. That's why with my coaching, it's really based around a framework that, and then I guide people on how to apply that to their vision and their ideas, rather than saying, this is the one way you build a business, because I don't believe that's the case.
Absolutely.
And it's more interesting that way too.
Exactly. And it's finding a coach who's actually earned their stripes. Yeah. Finding somebody who can actually say, yeah, I've been out there in the trenches. I know what it's like to have a month where you're so busy you can barely breathe, and then the next month when nothing comes in. And I found out how to fix that. Yeah. It's people who've actually done it. It might not be your industry, but they've been through what they're mentoring you in.
Yeah, exactly. But I had a similar experience in my first business, because I started 13 years ago as a communication consultant, is what I knew I could do. And I started with clients already. Getting clients from day one was not my problem. My problem was that I wasn't building my business and a business that I loved. And looking back, I really, I nearly burned out, because I was just I wasn't doing the work that I loved. I was doing work I could do very well, but that's not enough when it's your own business. And likewise, I look back and thought, if only I knew that things like business coaches and mentors existed.
Yeah.
And I think even if I did know them, they existed, I wouldn't have been confident that I was the kind of person that deserved something like that. So, but I think going back, if I had, like you, I would have been light years ahead. I would have built a very different business model, and had a very different experience. But these experiences we can then pass on to others, we can use as our later work. So, I wouldn't be where I am today if I had that experience. So it's all good in the end.
It definitely is. And it's really important. One of the other things I do want to say for everybody who's listening and watching, if we're talking about imposter syndrome, we need to look at comparisonitis. Yeah. What we found in the research study is 82% of business owners struggled with comparisonitis daily or regularly. And if you're looking at where somebody is on their business journey, you might be looking at Melita, you might be looking at me going, whoa, big success, or they're doing this, or they're doing something I'd love to do. Well, it's taken us over a decade to become that overnight success that the world sees on the outside. And there are other people who might just be 2 or 3 steps ahead of you, who, if you're comparing yourself to them, they've not had the same journey as you. What we're seeing on social media, for example, we all know it's the highlight reel, but actually it's not. It's the algorithm's choice of the curated best bits of the best highlight reels. So we're not comparing ourselves with something that's real. You know, somebody on the outside might look beaming and successful, and under the surface, their feet are going like ducks in a string. Yeah, just, as you say, close to burnout. We've all been there. Or they might have a team of 15 people supporting them, which is why they can just show up and do a live stream every day. We don't know what their journey is and what matters. And this is another bit of advice I wish I'd understood years ago, but at least I do now. Blinkers. Yeah, by all means, research what others are doing to get a feel for the industry, but then blinkers, stay in your lane. And the only feedback you need is from your dream clients, not from other people.
Yeah, amazing advice. I love that. The only advice you need is from your dream clients, not from other people.
Yeah,
exactly. I mean, they're the only ones that matter at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, customers don't always know what they want, but they know what their problems are. And if you can solve their problem in a way that fits with how they need it solving, and you can get yourself out of the way of that solution, so you clear imposter syndrome, then it's a win-win.
Yeah, that I often feel like sometimes I have a client and they didn't get the results by the end of the program that I wanted for them. And so I'm disappointed, but they got more than the results that they really wanted. So I have to be, and they are just over the moon that they now feel exactly how they wanted to feel. They're in exactly where they wanted to be for them. And I have to accept that. I was like, but you could have done so much more. But for them, it was just perfect at this stage. And so, yeah, that's something that I'm really working through. But you mentioned there comparisonitis, and I wanted to ask about perfectionism as well. How much does that cause or drive imposter syndrome as well?
So it's one of the 4 symptoms. I have a model called the 4 Ps: perfectionism, procrastination, project paralysis, and people pleasing. And as an entrepreneur, we normally know all 4 very well. So perfectionism is a defense mechanism. It's a coping strategy for imposter syndrome. So yeah, if you're running perfectionism, it's really important to look at, what is this perfectionism doing for me? What does it allow me to avoid? Because often it will be, we get to avoid completing projects because then nobody can judge us. Yeah. So things like the perfectionism, procrastination, it's really important to look at understanding what is driving that behavior, meet that need in a healthier way, and then you don't need the 4 Ps anymore.
Great. So Claire, you have just shared so much information. I've just been making notes and I'm going to have to go back and rewatch this and take even more. But is there any last piece of advice that you would like to give to the listeners that perhaps we haven't touched on already?
Yeah, the biggest thing is do whatever it takes to allow yourself to close that imposter syndrome gap. Yeah, to allow yourself to become the version of you that you were born to be, to make the difference you're really here to make. And that is a daily job. If all we do is focus on, what am I here to create? How can I allow myself to become that version of me? And then just take the tiny actions every day, we will achieve miracles. We'll change the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not our moments of brilliance that make the difference, but these tiny little things we do consistently every day. Fantastic advice. Thank you. So,
thank you so much.
You're welcome. So if people want to learn more about you, I'm going to put all your details in the show notes underneath this recording. But how, for anyone who's out and about on the road, how can they find you?
So there are 2 websites. My personal website is clarejosa.com, and my imposter syndrome website is ditchingimpostersyndrome.com. And that's got details of my book. I've got all sorts of stuff on there, loads of articles, videos, courses, so that you know what steps to take to be able to set yourself free from this, so you don't have to put up with it anymore.
Great. That's really exciting. And it's clarejosa.com. clare.com/ABC to get that free tool you were mentioning.
Absolutely.
And it's Clare without an I and
Without an
Josa with
I.
a K.
Yeah, just to be confusing.
Yeah. Brilliant. Clare, thank you so much for everything you've shared with us today.
Thank you so much. It's been a joy.